If a student wrote what Trump says, that student would flunk any course. It's childish.
Since we're on the topic of tariffs, Professor, obviously it's been several news cycles where everyone's kind of talking about Trump and his trade wars and his tariff threats. But, before we even try to break it down, what are the biggest misconceptions about Trump's tariff threats?
As an economics professor, which is what I've been all my life, I have had occasion to teach what are called trade economics or international trade. And if you teach that course to undergraduates, or for that matter, to graduate students, you will quickly discover that tariffs have been used on and off for centuries. There's nothing new about a tariff at all. In every course on these subjects, there's a whole section of the book, a whole section of shelves in the library full of articles and books analyzing tariffs from a theoretical point of view, but also empirical, studying when this tariff was levied in this country on these products, what happened? Do we have a reasonable sense of what they can do? And the answer is yes. And the reasonable sense is that sometimes they seem to work and other times they don't. And even when they seem to work, it's never quite clear whether it was the tariff that had this nice result or something else that was going on at the same time that made that happen. Bottom line, to imagine that tariffs are some magic bullet that will solve our problems can only be uttered by someone totally unaware of this literature, which we require students who major in economics to know. If a student wrote what Trump says, that student would flunk any course. It's childish.
They would flunk.
They would flunk. This is, and now let me explain because it's really quite easy to do. One of the assumptions given by Mr. Trump as a justification is the following, and his advisors say this even more than he does. During his first presidency, the overwhelmingly most important act that was accomplished was the Tax Reduction Act of December 2017. It was one of the largest tax cuts in the United States. It particularly helped corporations and rich individuals. Those tax cuts came at the end of what I mentioned earlier, a period of redistribution of wealth from the bottom and the middle to the top. In other words, what Mr. Trump achieved was giving a tremendous tax cut to the people who needed it least because they had just come off of 40 years of redistribution of wealth into their hands. A stunningly obtuse achievement. I'm being as nice as I can. In the law that was written in 2017, all of these lovely tax cuts expire in the year 2025, this year. So Mr. Trump is devoted to continuing them.
Yes.
Because if he didn't, the people who funded him would be getting a tax increase because the tax cut expires. That would be big for them. They don't want that. And he secured their support by promising he would make a priority. Well, if that's the case, then the government can't get that revenue. And the government is already running huge deficits in excess of $1 trillion a year in this country. And our national debt is now about 130% of our annual, which is dangerous territory and is something the whole world knows. Whoop. So what Mr. Trump says is, I'm going to hit tariffs And that tariff is going to raise a ton of money to compensate for the fact that I'm not going to let those tax cuts expire. There it is. Does this sound reasonable? If you don't know anything, it does. What's the assumption here? The assumption is that when you put, say, a 25% tariff, and let me explain very quickly, what that means is goods coming in to the United States from Canada or Mexico or China are now much more expensive the day that tariff goes into effect than they were the day before. It's a sudden, sharp increase. In the case of Mexico and Canada, 25%. Something you bought last week for $1 will now cost you $1.25. The buck goes to Canada to pay for the good. The 25 cents is a tax, because that's what the tariff is, a tax which you, the American buyer, pay to your own government.